I was in prison before they ever put me in handcuffs. And I was free before they ever opened the doors and said, you can go now. And what I realized is that everyone has their own hidden prisons, but every prison has a door.
Shaka Senghor is our guest today. And family, wow, he is someone whose story reminds us that no one is beyond redemption, and no prison, whether it's made of walls or our own minds, has to be permanent. Shaka was born in Detroit and served 19 years in prison, with 7 of them in solitary confinement. He did this before rebuilding his life into one of purpose and impact. His memoir, Righting My Wrongs, became a New York Times bestseller, and his new book, How to Be Free, continues his mission to show that redemption and freedom are possible for all of us. What draws me to Shaka's story is his understanding that so many of us are trapped, not just by bars, but by fears, shames, and regrets. Today, Shaka and I are talking about what is required to break free of our bars and to become all we can be. Enjoy this conversation with Shaka Senghor. Hey, Shaka.
Hey, how are you, JBH?
Oh, my goodness. I'm doing so great. I'm even better now that you're here. You know, I've been waiting to talk with you for a while.
I know, right? I'm happy we finally got a chance to make it happen and get caught up. And this has been a long time in the works, so I'm really excited to be here.
Yeah, we got so much we can talk about, and I think that our family listening are going to really enjoy some of the stuff you have to say, even if they feel that they're already familiar with you. I got to tell you, though, before we started this conversation, I was sharing with Nathan and Gina in the studio that for a while I had some friends. We call them followers now, right? But we weren't like on social media back then.
Right.
They used to write me letters from prison, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know what happened to them, but we got a lot to talk about, and maybe it's going to reveal what happened to them through talking with you. So, look, let's get to it. You've been open about growing up in Detroit during a time of violence, pressure, and pain. We're all aware of that.
Yeah.
Before we talk about the man you became, though, the guy I'm looking at right now, help us understand the world that shaped you, the mindset, the environment, even the search for belonging that set the stage for your story as a child, Shaka.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I grew up in Detroit, which I proudly represent all the time, no matter where I go, wherever I live. Detroit will always be home, both in my heart and in reality. All my family is back there. The Motor City, a city that's given the world so much. And I also grew up during a time when the city was changing and a lot was going on. Grew up in a household that I ended up running away when I was a teenager. My mother was very abusive, and that led to me running away and just thinking like somebody would see this kid and be like, yo, I'm gonna take this kid in, he has potential, and wrap him in the warmth that I think all young people are deserving of. But that didn't happen. Instead, I found myself seduced into the streets. And at that time, this is when crack cocaine had first just blew up in the Midwest. And so as a naive kid going into that culture, I didn't even realize how devastating it would be to my own life, but also to the community I came from. And first 6 months in, childhood friend murder, robbed at gunpoint. I was beat nearly to death. And I stayed in that culture, and 3 years later, I got shot multiple times down on the corner of my block and never got any treatment. All the things that I know now didn't exist back then. Nobody was calling inner city gun violence something, a pandemic, of its own. It was just kind of like, these black kids are shooting each other up, patch them up, send them back. And so I came back from the hospital as an angry, paranoid kid and started carrying a gun every day. And more importantly, I started creating this narrative in my mind of like, if I found myself in conflict, I would shoot first. And about 16 months or so later, I found myself in that conflict and tragically and sadly and regrettably shot and caused a man's death and was sentenced to 17 to 40 years in prison at the age of 19.
Yeah, and we think about 19 and all the privileges you have in a US based citizenship at that age, but there are a lot of criticalities that can occur for you at that age as well, especially if you've not been exposed or had interactions with circumstances and people that help you to manage through conversation and conflict. I remember Shaka back then, and set the stage for what time we're talking about. What years are we talking about now?
So this is like around like 86.
Okay, so you think about it in the early and mid 80s, what most people were hearing about what you were experiencing, they were hearing it dramatized and sometimes romanticized through music. They weren't really recognizing the cost and the penalties that came along with living the life that got dramatized. And so I think about it, and the opportunity, the percentage of chance that you were going to come out of that and be sitting here talking with me today from the platform you have of healing. And I don't think you ever completely heal, but the healing and the teaching that you're able to share to others, that's pretty incredible, and it's quite unusual, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my life outcomes are such that no one would have imagined that I live the life that I live today, other than myself. And I didn't always even recognize that there was ever going to be an opportunity to turn it all around. Like, when I went to prison, I was an angry kid. I got into a lot of trouble my first 5 years in prison. I accumulated about 35, 36 misconducts that ranged everywhere from dangerous contraband to assault on an officer or an inmate. I mean, it was bad. I spent a total of 7 years in solitary confinement. And the day I walked out of prison, June 22nd, 2010, an officer said to me, "I'll see you back in 6 months." And that's how sure he was, because 70% of people go back to prison. So it wasn't even like he wasn't just being mean. He was just stating the facts, like a lot of people get out and go back. And so there was nobody that believed that my life could become what it's become today. And it took a lot of work and it took a lot of luck. And I'm happy to talk about it all today.
I'm so glad you're talking about it with me, because our audience, which is 70% female, 30+% male, and age ranging from early university up through pre-retirement.
Mm,
My family is this audience I call my family, Shaka,
yeah.
are gonna know somebody, or gonna know somebody who knows somebody who's facing circumstances very similar today. And we have a global family who are listening to us right now. This isn't unique to Detroit, to growing
Right.
up in Detroit. You talked a lot about your early years as an honor roll student, with big dreams, and you talk about your life, how before it began to unravel and pull you into the streets. Talk about what that looked like to folks so they can understand, those. I mean, you said your mom was abusive, but when you look back at that young boy now, what was he really searching for, and what were the circumstances that were framing him for the life that you found yourself in by 19 years of age?
Yeah, that's a great question. I always think about that little boy that still lives inside of me. As I think with most adults, we're always reconciling the life of a kid that we once were, and unfortunately, like during that time, there were so many things that when I was able to go back and look at my life, there was just missed opportunities that the adults in my life had to intervene and to really kind of create what I think. Children, most children, when you think about these young people who get caught up in the streets, who get caught up in gangs and drug organizations, they're looking for acceptance and safety. And that's typically the people who manipulate young people into these cultures. They know that. Like I remember first, and I tell people all the time, like I was seduced into the drug culture, right? And what does that look like for a teenager? What it looks like is that someone sees you're going through hardship and they're like, "Hey, I can help you." And I remember when I first ran away, I just slept in friends' garages and basements, and they snuck me food, and we hustled food from up at the grocery store. And eventually, this older guy in the neighborhood was like, "Hey, man, I see you struggling. I can help you make some money. Here, hop in the car. Let's go grab something to eat." And he's talking to me about the opportunity to make a lot of money, and to have some shelter and to have some agency. And I was vulnerable. I had been away from home for a couple of weeks. I'm hungry. I'm unshowered, unclothed. Like I got the same clothes on for weeks. And that's what happens to a lot of these young kids. They get really seduced into a culture that, you know, once you get in it, it's really hard to get out of. It's very addictive culture. It's fast money. It's all the things that you think. You got your crew that you think really has your back. And as a kid, like, it's confusing. Like, your emotions are confused of like, oh, these are really my friends, and not realizing you're just one cog in the wheel. It's one of the reasons I mentor today, to kind of remind young people of like, listen, in the moment, these people are really going to feel like they're your friends. But when life gets real, you're going to realize that these people just saw you as another means to an end. And that's where I was at. And as a dad of a young teenage boy and a mentor to many, I pay attention to what young males need specifically. I mentor boys very different than I mentor the young girls that I've been fortunate to work with, because their needs are different. The love that a young boy needs from a man in his life is a little bit different from what a young lady needs from a dad or uncle or a mentor. So I'm just intentional about leaning into making sure that these young boys have a sense of being emotionally well-rounded, knowing how to ask for help, knowing how to say, I don't feel safe, and not being seen as a punk or being seen as weak, because they have a real human emotional need. And it's been incredible. I was just on the west side of Chicago. I was just on the west side of Chicago with some young men in a tough neighborhood. And, I remember walking into the space. It's called my office at a church. And, these brothers had that mask on, that tough mask. And once we got into conversation, I saw these little brothers just light up. And they were just like, okay, he's from where we're from. He's from the streets. He knows us. And before it was over, you can see that these brothers just want to be loved. They want to have the sense that the men in their life aren't trying to send them on some mission that'll end with them being in prison or getting killed. That they just want to be loved and supported, and know that their dreams and their ideas matter. And so, I'm fortunate to be able to do that work now. And part of that work of taking care of those little boys is taking care of the little boy inside of me. And that's the thing. As long as we got breath, we have opportunity. And as long as we have opportunity, we can love on, that broken kid inside of us, and continue to nurture. Because as you said, healing is a journey.
It is. It is. And when you talk about that child inside, that, we learn so much about what is going to frame our lives for the rest of our lives before we're 5 years old. I When I first heard about you, not only was I impressed and grateful for who you are, I was excited and anxious to talk with you. Now, while I've had lots of isms in my life, challenges and things that just weren't right, I can look you in your face and tell you, thank God it wasn't happening in my house, even as it was happening in my community. Mama and daddy, 11 kids, every one of us felt as though we were spoiled. Daddy and mama took care of us. We never received a day of any type of, federal or government assistance. Not looking down on that, rather elevating mom and daddy for how they approached life and approached us. And they were able to do that in a small town in the South. I think about how I'm so able to speak to women, to young men about my experiences that simulate or relate well to what they may find theirs being now. Can someone who grew up assume that because they share a race or because they share, any of the social ills that exist externally, can really speak into the lives of children who are growing up very different, children who are running away from home, growing up in the street? What was that little boy you were needing to hear or be given that would have turned that around within the circumstances you were in? You know, what can someone like me, someone like you now can give because you've been there? I haven't been there. I've been other places. I've been some rough places, but
Yeah.
I've not been there. How do we help in that circumstances? We got a big family listening to us right now.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. It's one that I actually get often. And what I say, so I teach a class at the University of Michigan. We not only do like one lecture a semester, but when I kick the lecture off, I'm talking to these students about how do they go into a prison and help the men, discover their talent as artists, writers, etc. And they're, one of the questions is like, well, how can I do that? And I don't come from where they come from. And what I say is that, you know, in any circumstance, if you lead with your humanity, your economic background, your class background, your gender, your race, none of that stuff matters as much as people know that you're showing up authentically as who you are as a human being. And I think what I needed back then was the safety and a surety that somebody really had my back and that somebody was actually listening to my cries of like, hey, what's happening in my household is not okay. Um, and sadly, I grew up in an era where, we didn't call back then a lot of things that happened to kids wasn't called abuse. It was
Mm.
just like your parents, they disciplined you physically, and that was it. And so now, looking
And
back,
we used to say, spare the rod, spoil the child. It was
right?
almost, if people looked at it as a sin if you didn't whip, beat, spank your children.
Yeah, which is to me, I still think it's the craziest thing is to hit kids to correct their behavior.
Mhm.
And especially, I'm a dad. I'm a dad of a teenage boy, and he's never been hit. And, he's 13 years old. I've never had to hit him. I've spent quality time with him. I talk through things. He gets disciplined in other ways, but it's never out of anger. It's out of like, how do I raise this boy with the right set of structural circumstance around him that empowers him to be a decision maker in his own life? Because ultimately, you can try to own your child's life, but the reality is that they're going to go off into the world and live based on their own experiences. And so, but to get back to your question, it's that thing of like, what that younger part of me needed was just safety. Safety and understanding that you know, I wasn't responsible for the things that happened to me. A lot of times we don't heal because we still carry this burden that somehow we brought this onto ourselves. And that was the thing that I was able to do on my own through journaling and realize like, my mother's decisions to show up in the way that she did and my dad's decision to allow it to happen and to be complicit in that, like that came out of their own experiences, right? Like they were responsible for that. And, fortunately with my parents, we have incredible relationships now because we're able to be really honest. And what I learned about my mother was that my mother had went through so many horrific things in her own life that the decisions she made, she thought she was protecting us and thought she was, keeping us out of the streets instead of running us to the streets. And so it came out of this distorted experience that she had, which is the case for a lot of us, and even those who are successful. Sometimes you get parents who've never done any of those things, but they impact their children negatively in a different way. They put this pressure to succeed on their children. They try to live out their own dreams through their children, and that's just as harmful as like striking a child because you're imposing something on them that really is not about their own journey. And so I just try to parent through, the understanding that my son will have his own journey.
And deep failure is not always represented by what circumstances you have with the law or with finances, because I've seen some financially successful people who've never had a brush with the law and feel like absolute failures. And it goes kind of back to what you were speaking earlier, Shaka, around that child inside. That inner child is a course of work. Many psychiatrists, psychologists, people who are working with social challenges are dealing with and looking to. I would guarantee you that many of the people listening to us right now have inner children who are not healed, who are crying, who don't even know what is wrong, who don't even know to look there. And so the message you're giving does have some community to it, and it has some relationship to it, regardless of whether we found ourselves on the street or not. When you turn 19 and your life changed forever after that tragic decision that cost another man his life, you started the beginning, I think, at that point of the story you wrote later. I think it was powerfully written, righting my wrongs. You said you went on to spend 19 years in prison at the age of 19. Talk a little bit about that. What was that for a 19-year-old going for prison? Was that just what folks did in the neighborhood and it wasn't really that bad? Was it you getting your props and getting your street creds? Or was it scaring you bootless? Or, two things can be true at opposing and same times.
Yeah, I mean, prison is prison in America specifically is horrible. It's a horrible experience for anybody at any age, but especially for young kids. I mean, like it's a very brutal, very violent environment. I went in with PTSD from being shot, and so now you're in a compounded environment because I also shot and caused a man's death. So there's compounded PTSD navigating in a very volatile environment, and it's really when you grow up in the hood, it's like prison is an extension of that. So
Mm.
I won't say that I went in like really afraid or that I went in of like, this is par for the course. It was just like, oh, this is familiar territory. Like some of my friends are here, some of my enemies are here, and this is where I have to navigate this world for the next, however many years. It ended up turning out to be 19 years.
Hmm.
And one of the things that I write about in the new book. I mean, you mentioned Writing My Wrongs, which is like one of my
Hmm.
first mainstream published books, which really tells the backstory. But the new book is really where I get to this kind of broader idea that we all have hidden prisons. And how I discovered that was when I got out of prison and started this journey as a writer and selling books out of the trunk. I started
You
meeting.
didn't mention the name of it, but I think you're talking about how to be free.
Yeah, the new book is called How to Be Free, a
Hmm.
proven guide to escaping life's hidden prisons.
Hmm.
And when I look back on the journey that brought me to this book, post incarceration and hustling books out of the trunk, out of the car, what I ended up doing was I met so many people along the journey. I've been really fortunate. I've been a fellow at MIT Media Lab. I've been a TED speaker. I've been a fellow at Kellogg, a fellow at Virginia Tech. I teach at the University of Michigan. I've been in Hollywood and Silicon Valley. So I've met people from all walks of life. And what would happen after I would do these talks is people would come and say, hearing you talk about your journey just set me free. I've never told anybody that I tried to commit suicide. I've never told anybody that I'm in the middle of a divorce. I've never told anybody that my child is on opioids and we're fighting for their life. And you've just opened up the door for me to be vulnerable, for me to be forgiving, for me to lean into the idea that I can have joy and love after all this hardship. And that's what made me write this book is because I realized I was in prison before they ever put me in handcuffs. And I was free before they ever opened the doors and said, you can go now. And what I realized is that everyone has their own hidden prisons, but every prison has a door. And I wanted to make sure that I provided people with the keys based on my own experience of meeting people. I mean, like I know some of the richest people in the world, some of the most successful, some of the greatest athletes. And I can tell you that shame, self doubt, negative self talk, insecurity, grief, like all those things show up as these hidden prisons and prevent people from being happy and fulfilled when it seems like they have everything at their disposal. And I wanted to help those people as well as people who are actually physically incarcerated.
Amen. I mean, the list is long and highly available of people who we look at and we measure them as successful, and they die some pretty sad or unaccomplished personally deaths. And I remember once hearing someone say Elvis Presley at the time of his death was one of the most loved people on earth. The sad thing is he hadn't learned to love himself.
Mm.
You know, he still had that child inside of him that hadn't healed. What helped you to start doing the work of rebuilding yourself?
Oh, that's a great question. So when I was in solitary confinement, I was lucky to be able to read. And, I would read books of people who have went through tough things, Nelson Mandela, Malcolm X, you name it, people who have been through hard things. Whenever I found myself struggling, I would turn to their books.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, reading Malcolm X's autobiography made me really curious, intellectually curious, because a lot of people when they think of Malcolm X's story, they're like, he was a leader for Black people. What a lot of people miss in his story is that Malcolm X was an intellectual, and he
Mm-hmm.
was very curious about the world, and he read everything he can get his hands on. And so I had this thirst for knowledge, and I would set my days up in solitary as if I was at school. I would study world history. I would study etymology of words by reading the dictionary and getting to the root of the word. I would read African history. And then I got into philosophy, which wasn't something that most people would have never thought for someone like me. Is like, oh, this guy's like reading philosophy, right? But one day I was reading I think it was Plato's Republic, but it was the Apology. And Socrates said that unexamined life isn't worth living. And I remember being struck by that, like, man, what does it mean to examine one's life? And I mulled over that thought for days before I finally started to write about what really happened to me. Like, how did I end up here? How did I go from this kid with dreams of being a doctor to serving out my most promising years in solitary confinement? And journaling, I was able to start really seeing all the trauma I had experienced, all the times I had been hit, beaten, failed, but I also was able to see the things that I had done to cause harm. And like that process of being able to really interrogate one's life, it was the most powerful thing. And then what I would discover was that I had never completed anything. And that's when I said to myself, you need to finish one thing if you're going to turn your life around. And I looked around this barren cell. There was nothing there but books and paper and pen. And that's when I decided to write a book. And I wrote my first book. And I challenged myself to write that book in 30 days. And I knew that if I finished that book, I could literally turn my life around. And I call it like my write or die moment, where I knew that if I did not write, I was definitely going to die in prison. And that finishing that first book in 30 days, I was like, you know what? You're gonna have a different life. You're gonna create a life for yourself. And I ended up writing a second book, and then I just started writing down, like, what do I want in my life? I didn't know if I was getting out of prison. I knew that even if I never got out, I knew the man that I wanted to become. And I started working on becoming that man through meditation, through journaling, through, reading and learning about life, being accountable, apologizing to people I caused harm to. And then I started imagining a life for myself. And I wrote it down, like, you know, what kind of car do I want to have if I ever get out of prison? What kind of wife do I want? What kind of family? What kind of career? And like, I just started writing down all these very ambitious goals. I call it just getting crazy with my crazy. I know it's like politically correct. You can't say crazy anymore these days. But I had to get crazy. That I had to think of the impossible in order for the possible to become accessible. And that's what I did, and that began that transformative journey of like being curious about life, interrogating myself and holding myself accountable to follow through.
Shaka, a lot of what you did had some measure of a template or a pattern from someone else's life. You were reading about Mandela, you were reading about Malcolm X and others. You were visiting back with the Greek philosophers. Now, when you went into prison, did you go immediately into solitary confinement? Like, did you bust out bad and you and that was it? I want to understand what happened in solitary confinement, because not to minimize nor to appropriate any understanding of it, from where I sit, solitary confinement, like when you talk about you can be in prison without a wall and you can be free while locked behind a door, that's powerful. There are people who are in solitary confinement, medically they're being diagnosed as in depression. And so I'm making some analogies here that maybe are appropriate or inappropriate, but certainly can be teaching. What happened to get you into solitary confinement? And where was your mental state then? How did you keep your sanity, or did you lose it and grab it back? As you said, crazy ain't, the right word for it anymore. It was what you were feeling then.
Yeah, that's a great question. I get oftentimes, sometimes people even say, man, it looked like solitary work for you. And that couldn't be further from the truth. Solitary confinement is one of the most barbaric and inhumane things that we do to people in this country. And, there's actually a new film that I have nothing to do with. So when I mention this film, I have absolutely nothing to do with the film,
Hmm.
but it is powerful. It's called The Alabama Solution. I highly recommend, if people really want to understand the brutality of our prison system, I don't think there's another film that comes close to articulating what is it like to
Say
be.
the name again of it.
It's called The Alabama Solution. And it is horrifying. It's horrifying what we do to people. For me, I didn't go straight into solitary when I got in when I went to prison. And I've actually been in solitary multiple times. The first time I went while I was in college in county jail, I attempted to escape and we got caught, and they put us in solitary confinement for that. And then when I went to prison, I went the first time I got into like a fight, and I was in for about a year. The second time I got into another dust up with a guy serving time, and then that led to me being in there for another year. And every time was different. The first
Now,
couple of times,
solitary confinement, you are in a room by yourself,
yeah,
and you get what, 1 hour a day out of that room?
yeah. So you're locked down 23 hours, 5 days a week, and 24 hours the other 2 days a week. And you can go out to these little cages. They put you in handcuffs and take you out to another cage outside because they gotta let you get at least some form of air. Um, And yes, it's a brutal lockdown, and I've done it in multiple facilities. The older facilities were the
Can
absolute
you
worst.
see anything when you're in solitary confinement? Are there windows?
Well, the first time I was at Michigan Reformatory, a really old prison. The only thing you can see is the wall in front of you. Except for whenever the officers are walking down the tier or they're walking.
How big is the space, Shaka?
It's very small. It's smaller than 6x9 in the older prisons. Like I'm not even tall. I'm like about 5'10", and I can like touch the ceiling easily, and I can literally touch both walls by sticking my arms out. So very very small space. And then in the newer, more modern prisons, there's a door versus bars, and then it's just like a window on the door. So it's a window shutter, and so usually they have
Hmm.
the window shutter closed. So I mean, you can get on the floor, try to look up under the crack or look through the cracks of the door. Like the thing about being human is we will fight to find a way to connect. We'll figure it out, whether it's looking through the crack of the door or talking to someone through the toilet. We used to take all the water out of our toilets, plug it up, and then we can talk through the toilet to other cells. So we would figure it out. But I want to say this because I don't want people to think like solitary work. I was really lucky. I was literate. The average reading grade level in prison is third grade. And I was fortunate to have read books that told me exactly what this environment was meant to do to me psychologically and emotionally. And so whenever I felt myself getting weakened by that environment, I would turn
Hmm.
to books and I would read books, and that would help me get through the moment. But it was tough. It's the toughest thing that I've ever done. When I look back on my life, it is the hardest thing that I've ever done. And what I did was I turned solitary into a university of higher learning, but I also was able to find solitude, which is different from being in solitary, inside of myself. I personally believe that freedom is an inside job. It's the work that we have to do inside to get to where we want to go. But it's tough. It's tough work. It's one of the reasons I wrote this book is I wanted people to know that I've really done the hard work for you by serving that 19 years and extracting those lessons that you can apply to life today without ever stepping foot in the cell. I've done the hard work for you, and it was hard work. Let's make no bones about it. Like, it is brutal. What I saw happen to people in there was something I would never want to witness again in my life. The way that people were treated, dehumanized, the way that I was treated, the abuses that I experienced in there, the constant threat to my life and my well-being. I would never want anybody to have to go through that. And I was fortunate to be blessed with the ability to read, the ability to write. And it's something I don't take for granted. And it's something that, when I look back on my life, I'm in this conversation with you because I'm literate. And all the magic that has happened post incarceration, none of that stuff would have happened if I would have not been able to pick up books. And it's one of the reasons that I became a writer, is because I think our testimonies are testaments that help other people. And when you have the capabilities and opportunity to share with others in whatever format, I think it's a responsibility as a human.
This is this is music and manna to my ears. So I recently, along with two sons of a high school classmate of mine, these are young men who are educators, started a STREAM school, science, technology, reading,
Mm.
engineering, arts, and math. And it was so important to us to place the R in the other reading. The average reading level, as compared to the national level, of students in the high schools in and around my hometown, Shaka, is fourth to sixth grade. My hometown has since, and the surrounding areas have sent amazing numbers of professional athletes into this world. Um, and I just believe that we can not only send professional athletes, we can send professionals at every level and every industry and every stream into this world. And so we're focusing on that. If you're in the mood, I'd love you to just do a TikTok few seconds of conversation to those students. We open doors in 2026, and I'd love part of their welcoming to the school to be from you, as well as a welcome to the rest of their life once they understand and value the strength of reading. Reading will be the key component to how we teach and how we grade students.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, to the students, this is one of the most incredible opportunities and one of the most empowering opportunities. Your ability to read is the differentiator in terms of successful outcomes across any industries. What I've been able to do as a writer is a result of me being a reader first. Like, I'm self-taught, and it just came from reading incredible writers and stories of people who have been through all type of things, success, failure, and the lessons they've learned along the way, and how I was able to extract that and apply it to my life. And I read everything. Like, there's no limit to what you should read. I think fiction is just as capable of getting to the truth as nonfiction. In fact, sometimes it's even better at getting to the truth. So I highly encourage you to read all the classics, to read your contemporaries, to find stories that express the experiences of the environments you come from, but to know that you are in a blessed experience and opportunity, and to show up just in the spirit of gratitude and the opportunities. And then I would say my personal mantra is to never settle for mediocrity when greatness is available. And for me, what that means is that if I know that I can just get by with average, effort, I could say that that's okay. But why would I do that when I know I can, exercise great effort? And so, in anything that you do, if you apply great effort to it, you will produce extraordinary outcomes. So, congratulations that you've been chosen to be a part of this school, and salute on what I imagine will be a successful semester. And hopefully I'll see you in person at some point.
Oh, Shaka, absolutely. We're going to give you an invitation to visit the school. Thank you. What a gift. What a gift. And I'm sure that as our family is listening, they've been inspired and they've been taught by what you had to say just in those few seconds to these future students. You know, talking about students, you got a letter from your 10-year-old son, and you said that letter had words that cut straight to your heart and shifted everything for you. Share with us when that was and what that moment awakened in you, not just as a father, Shaka, but as a man who was finally ready to make that change that brought you to us today.
That's a great question. Letters have played such an instrumental part in my healing journey. The letter you mentioned was one from my son while I was incarcerated. And he told me that his mom, told him that why I was incarcerated. And as a dad, it was devastating to read my son's words. And I write about that in Writing My Wrongs. And those letters, when I think about my journey, my second book is actually a book of letters called Letters to the Sons of Society, where I write these letters to both of my sons, because I've had these experiences with so many young men across the country. I wanted to create, something that they can go back and look to, and really get these life lessons. And I also experienced great letters from my dad. My dad wrote me all while I was incarcerated. He and I would exchange these powerful letters. And so letters thematically shows up in a lot of my work, including the new book. I think it's one of the greatest, expressions of our, inner self and inner being. And my son's letter was one of those moments that really challenged me and, helped me get to the other side to where I can write, books like How to Be Free and do the work that I do today in the world.
It's incredible. And, you've written that vulnerability isn't weakness, is the key to becoming our best selves. What has
Absolutely.
choosing vulnerability taught you about leadership? You are a leader. You're not, teachers are leaders. You are a leading teacher. How has it helped you to build real connection with others?
I mean, it's exactly what you said. Vulnerability is one of the greatest bridges between human hearts. And it's something that we don't talk about enough, especially when it comes to being a male in the world, is that somehow we've been, tricked into believing that if we get, vulnerable, we'll be taken advantage of. And, the reality is, for me, the experience couldn't be nothing further from the truth. It is the way that I've led with, an
Right.
openness of heart and mind. Um, it's allowed me to really reach young people in a way that's just it's amazing to see that light come on in young people's eyes and to know that these young people know that, listen, you can come to me with whatever, and children need that, right? Like even my own son, there's things that he'll go to my wife with that he probably wouldn't come to me with, or maybe he comes to another families with these different things, and children just need a community of that. And as adults, we need it as well, right? Like it's not just children. Like I see a lot of suffering amongst adults who don't know how to open up or who are afraid to open up because they've been silenced in the past. They've been shamed. They've been traumatized. And what I can tell you for me personally was I had to get vulnerable with myself first. And once I was able to sit with who I am and like the good, the bad, the imperfections, it just allows me to show up authentically with everybody in my life. It allows me to discern who are good people, who are not so great people, and it is magic. It's the true key to real freedom. And so when I walk in any room, I probably look extremely confident, but really what it is that I'm extremely vulnerable and open to whatever the experience is that I'm about to have.
Well, I think that's brilliant for all of us, wherever we are in our lives, to have that. And I think that's something that, especially those who are looking to have professional lives, experience on a recurring, if not daily basis. And Shaka, I think about something that a friend who started in my life as a client and later became a friend shared with me. He said he realized too late in his life to make it a difference in his career journey, but it made a difference in his life journey that he was only ever as sick as his darkest secret.
Mm.
And it required a lot of strength, vulnerability, and faith for him to be able to go inside and pull it out. And that sounded like a really big, and actually that sounded like a lot to me to have to get there. Once he explained to me a little deeper about what it was that he had hidden underneath there and stuff he couldn't even imagine that was in there, I started to get to where he was. And I thought about that as I became a parent. As you said, your 10-year-old son wrote to you. Parenthood has taught me more about leadership and social inclusion than any other engagement along my life's journey. And fatherhood seems to have become one of your greatest teachers. Um, what lessons from your own journey do you hope to pass on to your sons and to anyone watching how you continue to turn pain into purpose? And how do you feel about, you said I've done the work for you earlier in our conversation. How do you feel about us as parents wanting to reduce the pain for our kids? Do we deny them that journey toward where we are, or do we simply pave that journey by doing that? That's two big questions.
Yes, those are great questions. When I think about my role as a father, I think about what it means to be a true student. My dad said that we're not here to teach our children; they're actually here to teach us. And I remember when he said that, I was like, man, that's deep. And I thought about it, and I was like, man, I've learned a lot about myself through parenting, and I've learned a lot about life and like how do you actually show up. And I think the role of a parent is to be a kind of a guiding force, to create some boundaries and structures that allow children to actually find their own sense of agency. And in the book, one of the things I talk about in How to Be Free is the well intended prisons that we find ourselves in, like helicopter parenting, where we're like, you know what, I'm gonna make life as easy as possible for my children, and I'm gonna hover over them, and I'm gonna make sure that they're always protected, and that they don't fall and scrape their knee, and that they don't, fail at school, and all the things. And I think that's a big mistake that we make, especially when you become empowered and you become successful. Sometimes we're replaying, our own childhood through the rearing of our children. And that's a dangerous thing because it doesn't empower your children to figure out how to be resilient on their own. The way that showed up in my life is, last year, my youngest son, Sekou, who was 13 years old, he was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes. And it is tough. It is tough when your body turns on you. And, if I could take away the pain and the suffering and all the things that it's done to his young life, I would probably want to do that. But I wouldn't do it because that was the journey that he was given by the creator, God, universe, whatever people choose to call it. And what I remember sharing with him on a walk shortly after he was diagnosed, and he had questions about his mortality, which was heartbreaking as a dad to have to really say, son, you're not gonna die, from this, but you do have to take care of yourself. And it's a very dangerous illness to have, chronic illness to have. But I remember we went on a walk, and I just said to him, I said, this is your assignment. This is the assignment that was given to you, and you get an opportunity to be courageous and bold. You get an opportunity to be a leader and a warrior with this, And so, as a parent, what I was happy for is when we got to a tough moment in life, that the building blocks were already there. That we've created a life to where we allow him to explore, to fail, to figure things out, to have agency, I try to raise my son with as much freedom as possible, because I know that that's where the greatest lessons learn is when you just try something and it works or it doesn't work. You can get creative and figure out what do you enjoy, and that's the power of like parenting with an awareness of what it means to be really free. And so What I would encourage anyone who's a parent is to just know that you're a student. Um, you're going to be a student more than you're going to be a teacher. And if you're patient with your own ineptitude, because we all are, like no parents is perfect. We're all going to fail at this thing. I can assure you that you're not always going to get it right. But if you extract a lesson from it, you can definitely improve as you move forward.
Well, Shaka, for our family listening, I'm encouraging them to read all of your writing because it's truly brilliant and so teaching, and I'm grateful to you for it. In this moment, what they've heard from you, if they've not heard of you before, is that you made a bad decision. You went to prison and you found some healing, and now you're helping others. What they've
Absolutely.
not heard is any mention of anger at all. Has anger ever been a part of your life? And if so, did you manage it? Did you get rid of it? And how do you look at anger in the process of us living our lives on the whole?
So that's another great question, and the way that I respond to this may be shocking to you, but I think anger is one of the most important emotions we can have. And for a long time, especially as a man, anger has been demonized as almost the worst emotion we can have.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But when anger is healthy, what it signals to you is that something is wrong here, and it has to be addressed. Now, what we do with that anger is where we can find ourselves in trouble. But like when I see an injustice, or when I see abuse, or when I see somebody being a bully, that's very angering to me because I know what it feels like to be subjected to those things. And how it showed up in this latter part of my life after I went on a healing journey is originally I was afraid to become angry, because I didn't know how I would react to it. Because when I was a teenager and I got angry, it led to the loss of life. So it was a very traumatizing experience for me. So what I did is I suppressed a lot of those emotions, which is very dangerous. And it wasn't until October in 2021 where I really gave into being angry, which was probably like 30 years from the time that I was actually incarcerated. And it was when a trainer was negligent with our beloved puppy and left the gate open, and our puppy got ran over and killed. And then the trainer lied to me and told me that it was the puppy's fault that it was killed. And I remember the next day just kind of doing some aimless strolling on Instagram, and I came across this trainer with his daughter and their dog. And I just saw like his daughter was just so full of like joy and laughter. And it reminded me of like all the moments that my son had spent with our puppy and how much joy. And I was so angry that another father could lie to a father about their pet. And I'm like, if he didn't know anything else, he knows how important a pet is to a family, and he chose to lie. And I just remember being so angry about it, and then just vocalizing like what I wanted to do to this man. And it was completely irrational and nothing I would have ever done. But what I found liberating was giving in to just being able to say those things, and then to land on that's not the choices that I want to make at this point in my life, but that's how I actually felt. And it was okay to have those feelings and not act on them. And that it was actually one of the most human things you can do is to express how angry you are, but to lean into love of my family and knowing that if I gave into the anger, it would hurt them. And so that duality, that power of being able to say, hey, listen, I'm really upset, but my love is so much stronger than this moment of anger that I'm in, and that I'm going to lean into this love without ignoring this anger, without acting like I'm not upset, but that love can be more powerful if I give it agency. And that's what I chose to do in that moment. And so I write about, actually it's the second chapter of How to Be Free is anger, because it is a hidden prison that we find ourselves in, both when we lean too far into it, but also when we fail to acknowledge it and suppress it and act like it doesn't exist. And now we're trapped in resentment. And so for me, it's more about we have to give ourselves the agency to be okay with all of our feelings, and to be okay with all of the things that make us human. And for men specifically, like, don't deny your anger, but also don't avoid love and joy and other emotions that are balancing factors in what it means to be human.
This is so powerful, and as I told you, I love your writing, so that's why I
Thank you.
wanted to make sure we had this conversation about anger, because I think that how you treat anger and how you teach the use of anger is so important, and what is missing from a lot of the other lessons that professionals as well as other people I know, we're just not getting it that way, and it's so important. And it's dumbfounding to me that it's not addressed more openly and more commonly as you do it. Have you ever read a book called As a Man Thinketh?
Absolutely, it's one of my favorite books by James Allen.
Yeah.
It's one of the books that I read when I was incarcerated, and one of the things that
Tiny little pamphlet. It's almost a pamphlet, isn't it? By the
it's
way,
about,
I gained the permission to rewrite it, so I rewrote it to as a person thinketh and handed it
mm,
out to everybody who we helped find full time jobs for years. In
yeah,
that book, do you remember these lines out of a poem? It says, "We think in secret, and it comes to pass. Environment is but our looking glass." Do you remember those two
absolutely,
lines? And
absolutely,
when I look at you,
yeah.
I think of you manifesting that in such a brilliant way for us, and how right you are that you have done the work we don't have to do, yet we still have to do our work.
Absolutely, absolutely. That book. One of my favorite parts of that book when it talks about the seeds you plant in the garden,
Yeah.
and if you plant these weeds and you allow them to grow, that's exactly what that garden will become—a garden full of weeds. But if you plant beautiful flowers, it'll give an aroma that allows us to really appreciate life. And I just never forgot, like, the power of the narratives and how we get to them, right? And you're right. I've done the hard work, but we still have to do our own work. And what this book serves is a framework, right? It's a methodology. It's a how to, that I've actually lived, and I think a lot of these books are incredible. I mean, I have a whole shelf of, like, self self help, professional development, personal development. One of the things that I think makes How to Be Free so special is I've actually lived the things, the extremes, right? All the negative things I've lived that. Like, I'm not just telling you from somebody else's experience, but I've also lived all this positive because I've employed all the things I talk about: journaling, meditation, mindfulness, healthy friendships and relationships. So those things that I'm telling you about, like, I live them, and I'm telling you, Mike, my life is amazing as a result of it, and I want people to have that for themselves.
This is incredible. This is incredible. Shaka, your story has given so many people permission to believe in their own redemption. I'm praying every member of our family will read all of your writing. You know, what most importantly do you hope our family remembers about the power of their stories to heal, to teach, and to change lives from this conversation?
The one thing that I want everyone to take away from, if they take away nothing else, is that every prison has a door.
Mhm.
And that's it. Every prison has a door. They can get out of anything that does not serve them. You can get out of it, and really understand that you are worthy of the best that life has to offer. Like, you wasn't put here to play small, to operate out of a scarcity mindset. Like, it is magic to be here. And if you embrace the idea that it is magic to be on this journey, then you know without a doubt or a certainty that you are deserving of all the magic that life has to offer. But you got to believe it. You got to believe it. And in order to believe it, you got to use those exit doors to those prisons that are holding you back.
This is so powerful. So many people listening right now, so many people who we may even sit and have dinner with, or sleep next to, are not feeling what you're saying, and they're not seeing what you're saying before this moment, I should say. And after everything you've lived, learned, and overcome, you've shared truths with us that I think you hold really close to your life. And you've shared with us how we can become, no matter from where we start, what we want to become. Is there anything else you want to share before we go 4 for 4?
No, the only thing else I want to share is that, I really hope people take the time out to really lean into how to be free. Have study groups, reach out to me, let's talk about it. I want people to live the most amazing, liberated life possible because we all truly are deserving of that.
Well, if you want to invite the family to reach out to you, you can certainly tell them how, and we can show them how. So here's the moment to do that.
Yeah, I can be found anywhere up under my name, Shaka Senghor, any platform, LinkedIn, Instagram, you name it, you can find me there. Just reach out, let's connect, let's build.
And I pray that a lot of our family who are at the beginning of their career will do that, whether they see themselves in danger or in any sensitive circumstance right now. I pray they'll reach out, because sometimes it's good to prevent, not just to heal.
Absolutely.
Let's go 4 for 4.
Let's do it.
So I'm going to ask you 4 questions. There are no wrong answers. You'll give me 4 answers to each. Okay. And the first question is, Shaka, you get to host dinner for 4 people from any time in history to present.
Mm.
Preferably, they will be human people, not humanoids. I know we're living in an age of AI, and that could be tempting. But who are the 4 people at your table, and why?
And you said from any walk of life, dead or alive. Um,
Yes.
LeBron James.
Why?
I think he's such a extraordinarily interesting athlete. I think he's a one of a kind person. I'm inspired. I love athletics. I'm super inspired. But what's really striking to me about him is who he is as a family man and how he shows up in service of community and others. And I would just love to talk more about that with him. Um, I would say Alex Haley, um, because as much as I would love to have dinner with Malcolm, I'm more interested in what Alex Haley's experience was with Malcolm, but also with writing Roots. I think that's so fascinating.
How many times did you read Roots, and did you watch the series?
So I read the book. I think I read it one time, and then I read these other books that kind of was like I feel like they were predecessors to Roots, called Segu, which is by Maurice Conde. Oh
Yes,
my
yes,
God, I love that book so great.
yes, yes.
Um, yeah, and then I've watched the series when I was a kid, and I watched snippets of it since I've been an adult. But I'm not sure. So right now I got who I got. I got LeBron, Alex Haley.
Yeah,
Did I say Bob Marley?
you did not,
Then I would say Bob Marley. I think Bob.
because
I just think his writing as a artist was just like the most phenomenal writing in the literally in the world in terms of where we're at today.
if
Like
he
how many
never
of the
wrote
things.
anything but one love, that would be a big message, wouldn't it?
I
That
mean,
is the
absolutely.
message.
And he wrote so many that was just so incredible. The fourth person would be Barbara Walters. I think Barbara has talked to so many people in the world, and I think she's like such an incredible journalist. And she seemed like she had a really good sense of humor, despite a lot of the serious subject matters that she covered. And I would just be curious about like what were some of the more interesting things that she never got a chance to like talk about on her platform. So I think those would
Yeah,
be the
and
four
then
people. I
think
think that
about
would be a
her.
great dinner party.
I love her as a guest for you, and I'm going to be the fifth guest, so I get to talk with her as
Yeah, you got
well
to
as
pull
well as
up.
your other folks. I mean, you think about it. She had her own journey. She had to travel, and she had to pioneer some stuff, and she was able
Absolutely.
to have cheer and joy in her life.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's a wonderful guest amongst those folks that you've got at that table. That's a good table. Ready to
Yeah,
go
yeah. No, I
two
think
for four?
incredible. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay, so what four pieces of music are you listening to, and why for you are they the top four? The top four.
Yeah, so top four right now. I've recently been listening to Most Def's Black on Both Sides. That album is just it's such a phenomenal piece of writing. It's one of those albums where there's probably five albums in hip hop that if someone came from another planet, it was like, what is hip hop? And that album would definitely be one of those ones where you get all the magic of it. The writing is pure. The art itself is, it's not this typical kind of like gratuitous, violence. Which I listen to all hip hop just to be clear, but there's a purity to this that's just different. I would say Stevie Wonder's Inner Visions. That album is just always on repeat. It's so funny because I'm like, Songs in the Key of Life is an amazing album, but there's something about Inner Visions that just really speaks to me on so many different levels. I would say Led Zeppelin, like that. Anything that they have done has just been
Yeah,
incredibly,
yeah.
yeah, inspiring. Like I listen to a lot of their work. Man, if it's a fourth, what's my fourth album that I'm listening to right now? So I've been heavy on Most Def, heavy on Inner Visions, heavy on Zeppelin lately. Um, it's funny, I've been listening to a lot of Anita Baker songsters. So that'll be my four albums.
That's incredible. You know, when you were going through your conversations about what you read while you were in prison, I was thinking, we probably got a lot of the same stuff on our shelves. We got a lot of same
Yeah,
stuff on our playlist as well. So,
yeah,
so,
yeah.
so, so I feel as though we're welcoming ourselves into a friendship. Shall we
Absolutely,
go
absolutely.
three for four?
Let's do it.
Okay, what four books do you recommend our family read and why?
Hmm. Okay, so I did put a book of recommended readings in the back of How to Be Free because I really wanted people to do that. So I would
You
say,
did, yeah.
oh, yeah, I always recommend As a Man Think About James Allen. I really recommend that book to everybody. Um, Stephen King on writing
Or they can
is
get
one of
my
my
rewrite as a person thinking.
yeah. As a person thinking, definitely, yeah, I grab that verse. Stephen King on writing is just such a masterful book. It's so good. On the business front, a friend of mine has a book called The Hard Thing About Hard Things. It is literally one of the best books on management, what it means to be a CEO. But what makes it really great is it's just a well told stories. And then I would say the fourth one would be What Happened to You. I think that book with Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah is just such a powerful book to really help people, navigate their own stuff. So, yeah, I think those are four great books actually. Yeah,
Fantastic. Well, we made it. Four for four. You ready?
four. Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. You've shared so much, Shaka, with us that listened well to is already advice. As we come to the close of this conversation, what four pieces of advice do you phenomenally wish to leave our family with? And if it's advice that was shared with you, please pay homage to the author.
Absolutely. So the first piece of advice I would say is never settle for mediocrity when greatness is available. That is just such a powerful way to approach life. It's such a you can't lose there. I would say the second thing would be fall in love with the beauty of your mind. Our minds are a sacred space. They're amazing. Our capacity to learn, to share, to be curious is literally unmatched. So I would say those two things. I would say stop and smell the flowers. That comes from a conversation I had with Oprah. She would just reminded me of like making sure that no matter what you do in life, just take a moment to pause and appreciate the beauty that surrounds us. So I would definitely say that, and then I would
You
say
know
the
what my
fourth.
daddy used to say? You know how my daddy used to say that, Shaka? He used
Yeah,
to
how?
say, stop and smell the roses before you're planted in the garden.
Mm, I like that. That's a powerful take. If that's real,
Mm-hmm.
um, I would say the last piece of advice would be fail fast. And that comes from several CEOs I've talked to throughout my career. I don't know who the original author of that comes from, but fail fast. And what that means is that you try as soon as you have an idea and get the failure out of the way because you're going to learn a lot and move and be able to move forward in life. So those would be the four pieces of wisdom.
Well, you've certainly given us more than four pieces of wisdom, but the four pieces you've given us close out this conversation in a beautiful way. Please don't let it close out our continuing conversation. Come back, let's talk more, and thank
Absolutely.
God you live and that you share your life with us, Shaka. From my heart to your home, God bless you. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much, JBH. It's been truly an honor and a joy to be in conversation with you today. And thank you to those who are tuning in to our conversation.